Coming in Facebook, coming in YouTube. Getting ready to start my show called Jimmy Rants over on Instagram. Just getting last few little things set up here. It is 11 o'clock, so I need to get this show on the road. So come on in, make yourselves at home, you guys. Get ready for today's show. Really interesting one to share with you here today, so hold on to your hats. What's up, Mitzi? What's up, Norma? We're gonna get started because I am running late over on Instagram and I like to get started on time. So if you're ready, I'm ready. Here we go. Is COVID-19 leading to a new pandemic of suicide? Find out here today on Jimmy Rants. Click on that little box down there in the corner. It'll take you straight to IGTV for today's episode of Jimmy Rants. JimmyRants.com is the website. And as always, you can engage live in the content. You got to go follow me. I'm over on Instagram. I'm at Living Low Carb Man, LIVINLOWCARBMAN. Once you're there, engage live just like all these wonderful people are doing right now. Thank you guys for being here. We're also simulcasting over here on my Facebook page. So welcome into Carolyn and Carol Ann who just popped in. Thank you guys for being here. We also have my YouTubers over here representing strong over on YouTube. So thank you guys all for being here today on Jimmy Rants. If you missed the live, we do have it on replay for you right here on Instagram. It's on IGTV, so as soon as this is over, it goes right up to IGTV, and if you follow my page on Instagram, it actually embeds it right there, like the first 15 seconds of the video, and then you can watch the full-length video right there on my page on IGTV. We also put the past episodes up over on YouTube, so type in a keyword Jimmy Rants, you will find the show. Today is Tuesday, and on Tuesdays on my podcast called the Living La Vida Low Carb Show, we air the best of Jimmy Rants, so we got a great episode in store for you guys here today. In fact, I can pop it, I think. Nope, it's on the other phone. I was gonna say I could pop the little graphic for it up on the screen, but no, I cannot because it's on the other phone. So yeah, go to llvlc.com. You can see today's show, and then finally pop on over to jimmyrants.com. You can watch all the past episodes there, and then if you like what we do here, definitely click on the Patreon link, and any donation of any amount would be greatly appreciated. Okay, you guys, I want to talk about a topic here today that quite frankly is incredibly disturbing to anybody that cares about humanity. And we all have lived through the trauma that is the last few months, dealing with the fears and the doubts and the uncertainties and everything as it relates to COVID-19. And of course, those have not gone away. We're still dealing with those things. We're still having to go through the ramifications of, we don't know what's going on. We don't have any certainty about anything about any of this. And so in that uncertainty, there are people who are already dealing with some of the ill effects, not of COVID-19. Everybody's worried about getting the virus, and I keep screaming from the mountaintop, okay, great, it's wonderful that we're trying to avoid the virus and we're all waiting on a vaccine and blah, 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 all the little talking points that they put out there. But in my mind, it's all the non-COVID-19 impacts to health and things happening in our culture that I'm more concerned about. And I've been watching a lot of the statistical data as it relates to the increase in the number of mental health drugs that people are taking. The last count I saw that mental health medications are up in sales by as much as 35% since the beginning of COVID-19. And of course, people were already teetering on some of those brain health things, mental health things long before this came along, and this has just kind of pushed them over the edge, so to speak. And unfortunately, when you already have some psychological issues going on, mental health disturbances going on, and then something like this happens, and then you lose your job, and then you have uncertainty, and you have fear, some people allow those fears to overcome them to the point that they do destructive behavior, either in the form of committing crime or they take their own life. And I think the great unspoken truth about COVID-19 is we have seen an epidemic level of suicide. And we're not done. Like, I think some of the ramifications of all the things that have happened, all of the actions that have been placed on us, I'm like, think about all the things that they've done to keep us safe from the virus. Stay at home. A lot of us did that. Isolate yourselves from a lot of people. Don't go out in stores unless you absolutely have to. We did that. Stay 6 feet apart if you do have to be in contact with other people. People have done that. Wear a mask so you cover up most of your face, particularly the nose and the mouth, so all you see is people's eyes. We've done that. Don't go to church. Don't go to movie theaters. There's no sports to go watch. Think about all the things that are normal areas of release that we take for granted and have before 2020, regularly taken for granted, will always be there. And then let's not talk about the lack of physical touch, the lack of having communal experiences together where you're laughing and you're basically releasing a lot of the stresses and pressures of life. And so friends, this has happened as well in 2020. People you thought were your friends have now suddenly abandoned you. I have one friend that I talked to pretty regularly long before COVID-19, would always talk to this person. And since COVID-19 went down, I have not heard a word, even though I've reached out several times to try to connect, check in on this person, and would hope that this person would check in on me, considered them a very, very good friend, and they've gone silent on me. And I see them active on social media, but they're not active with me. So we've got some of those broken kinds of relationships happening too. And I say all this, if you're just joining us, we're dealing with a pretty underground pandemic in the making, epidemic in the making, of what's happening with everybody, dealing with all the stuff associated with COVID-19, what's happening in terms of suicide rates and other kind of mental health things. And I have a couple of stories here, not sure how I'll be able to get through both of them, but I definitely want to hit on a lot of the major points, because this is a huge, huge problem, you guys, that if we don't address that it's an issue now, we're going to be seeing for many years to come the ramifications of all the fallout of what's happening in our culture right now. And all of it's detailed in these papers. All right, so this first one is from Psychology Today. Are we facing a post-COVID-19 suicide epidemic? What about the long-term consequences to our mental health? Will life go on as before when the pandemic finally passes, or are we looking at some permanent changes in how we live? Unfortunately, the damage may be more far-reaching than anyone even realizes, especially when it comes to the subject of suicide. While pandemic-related suicides have already been reported in many hardest-hit countries, these deaths have been largely overshadowed because of the high rate of fatalities linked to COVID-19 directly. In Italy, for example, the first pandemic-related suicide happened in March of this year when a patient suffered from pneumonia, jumped out of the hospital window where he was awaiting test results to see if he was infected. Since then, numerous other suicides have been reported, primarily among frontline health workers. Oh my gosh, the health workers, you guys. If you know a nurse, a doctor, anybody in the medical profession who has worked on the front lines of COVID-19, please give them love, give them a text, a DM, something that shows you care. And I know about a half dozen directly working on the front lines of COVID-19 right now. And I'm all the time trying to encourage them because it's been very, very tough on all of them. And I'm sure it has pushed a few to suicide. People awaiting test results for COVID-19. So just the fear of what if is causing people to take their own life. And then those who have been bankrupted as a result of coronavirus policies of closing down businesses. I think about all those poor businesses that not only couldn't open for a period of time, then you had all the protests who then looted those businesses. And then when they were allowed to open, they had to have all these draconian measures of doing this and that and this and that if they had a business to come back to. I know here locally where I live, there's a bunch of even chain stores that are starting to close down because, quite frankly, the last few months has been decimating to that business. And this is a part of what's driving this suicide as well, as people had poured their life savings into a small business to get it off the ground, and they poured everything into making it successful. And then one little 3-month period where they couldn't open their doors and it totally killed them. Now, some people would say, well, they were fledgling anyway if they shuttered down because of 3 months. Like, you don't realize a lot of the margins in these stores and any business for that matter tend to be kind of small. And plus in a mom and pop store, your margins are much smaller than you could be at, say, a Walmart, where they get better margins because of their buying power. And so these poor people have to shut their doors because a few months of coronavirus related shutdown just killed them. While similar cases are also being reported internationally, the risk of a pandemic related risk in suicide remains a particular concern for the US, since it has the largest number of deaths associated with COVID-19. According to the CDC, suicide, listen to this, you guys, suicide is already the 10th leading cause of death in the US. Did you know that? Suicide, the 10th leading cause of death. And there's been a 35% rise in the suicide rate just between the years 1999 and 2018. So in 20 years, we've gone up 35% in suicide rate. A new article recently published in the Journal of the American Medical Association suggests that we may be at the beginning of something far, far worse. The title of that was Suicide Mortality and the Coronavirus Disease 2019. It's a perfect storm. The article suggests that the unprecedented public health actions needed to contain the COVID-19, social distancing, stay at home, stress due to job loss, may well result in far more suicides in the years to come. It was written by a team of mental health professionals led by Mark Reger of the University of Washington. The article outlines many of the economic, psychosocial, and health-associated risk factors that can be expected to lead to an increase in the risk of suicide. So let's look at some of those factors. The first one is kind of an obvious one. It's the economic stress. Considering all the recent business closures, lost jobs, as well as a shutdown in most public events, the fear of the new economic recession or even a depression matching that of the 1930s seems to be all too real. Research studies have long demonstrated that economic downturns are often followed by an increase in suicides. But the uncertainty surrounding the current downturn, including the sharp drop in stock market and a resulting loss in retirement funds, housing foreclosures, and the question of when or if people can return to work, will certainly trigger more deaths in the future. See, this is the thing. This is like a wave. Like, we're kind of in that first little wave of where people had the shock of losing their job, and now they're trying to scramble to figure out, what am I going to do to take care of my family? Then the second wave will be when the economy hasn't quite picked up enough and other businesses have to close. And then those people are now left trying to find work where they had work before and now they don't have work. So it's going to come in waves, and then people are going to run out of savings accounts and then have the financial structure. So an economic stress is a biggie, but there's also social isolation. Research has shown the importance of social connections in helping people overcome depression and suicidal thoughts. While social distancing remains an important tool in containing the COVID-19 threat, the resulting loss of contact with friends and family will certainly add to the emotional burden that we're all experiencing. This is especially hard on retirement home residents and hospital patients who, because of their health precautions, have been denied regular contact with loved ones except through phone or Skype. If you have an older person or someone with a susceptibility to this virus, that if they got it, it would be very bad news, please stay in contact with them. I think we forget about in our own lives, we tend to be very self-centered. We tend to think everything through our own prism, and we don't always think about those people that can't get out. Like, we have the luxury right now of getting out, and being smart about it, wearing masks, social distance, all the things. But there's some people that don't. My mom is one of those people, by the way. She's 70 years old, and she has this condition that's an autoimmune condition called myasthenia gravis. So her immune system is already kind of under attack. And so she has not gotten out of her house since all this went down. Now, thankfully, she has my sister there in town, and now she's living with my sister, and she's able to get that support that she needs. But man, like, imagine you're used to going out and about and doing things all the time, and now it's not there for you. And there's a lot of people in that situation. So if you know somebody personally in your life like that, be their lifeline. Be that angel that they need right now, because they are most at risk for suicide. And I know this is kind of something taboo. You're not supposed to talk about suicide, Jimmy. Yeah, I don't care about taboo, you guys. You know me well enough. I always speak truth, even if it hurts. And I feel like the truth about COVID-19 and the ramifications of all the things that we've gone through is we're going to see an increase in suicide. I don't think it's inevitable if we can do our part to help alleviate some of these issues I'm talking about here, but it is a real prospective problem on the horizon. Though social media has become increasingly important in helping to maintain personal contacts, the uncertainty over when distancing rules might be eased can only add to the emotional stress that we're all feeling. And let's be honest, I love coming on Jimmy Rants and seeing all you guys on video. I don't see you, but I see that you're typing things. And so I love engaging. You see my voice, you hear my voice, and you see my face every day. There's somewhat of a familiarity through that. But this only goes so far. This is not the same as reaching out and touching someone in person, hugging them, smiling, facial expressions, all the things that make us human. And we've lost a bit of that because of the measures that we have to do to protect ourselves. And so we need to be cognizant of that. We've had a loss of community and religious contact for Americans who are part of religious, ethnic, or social community. Being able to attend regular events, including religious services, can be an essential part of feeling connected with other people. While some religious congregations have opposed social distancing rules, the closing of most religious and community centers has increased social isolation for many Americans. Given that weekly attendance at religious services has been shown to reduce suicide risk compared to non-attenders, losing this support may make that social isolation harder to bear. And I know a lot of Christians, of which I am one, kind of got upset. Well, you've got liquor stores open, you've got Walmart open, but I can't go to my place of worship. And I mean, it is this release for a lot of people where you have this notion that you're kind of feeling isolated. And that's probably for a lot of people their only connection they have all week long. And so, yeah, when you take that away, it makes it difficult. And I would even say all the sporting events, which is kind of a religious experience for a lot of people. Like, I'm a big fan of NBA basketball. I like NFL football and college football. All of those things are kind of up in the air right now. I know NBA is trying to come back in a bubble down in Orlando here in a couple weeks. But for the most part, those things have been gone. And there's been a very decided emptiness that has come from, okay, those are places I usually would put some of my energy to release some stress, and it's not there to release it. Same with like religious organizations and social organizations. You miss those connections, and it's through those connections that you don't even realize. Maybe that's the great awakening of 2020. We're now finally realizing the value that comes from having those human contacts and those human things in our life that make us social beings. And it's through that social being that you become who you are. Like, I'm a very outgoing, open, very extroverted person. And part of being an extrovert is you need an audience of people to extrovert to. So coming on video definitely helps me personally with this, even though I don't see you. It gives me the opportunity to speak out like I know I do in my personality, but it's not the same as seeing people in person, looking at eyeballs, making people laugh, hugging. Like when we go to keto conferences, which all of those have been shut down. None of the keto conferences have happened since all this happened. And so I'm used to going to those conferences and hugging everybody there. And what impact has that had on people like me? Now, not me specifically. I have not had suicidal thoughts whatsoever, even though I'm all by myself, even though I'm isolated, even though I am extrovert and I'm missing hugging people and interacting with people. I know people who are going through those things, and we need to help identify them. So if you know people like that, go reach out to them. It seems kind of odd that people that are extroverts you would think would be the least susceptible to a risk of suicide, but I would argue they're probably the most susceptible, because what do they need? They need people. When you're an extrovert, you need people around. When you're an introvert, you like being isolated. But those of us that are type A, extrovert, we're the ones that need your support. So keep that in mind. Barriers to mental health treatment is another one. While hospitals and other primary care facilities continue to see clients' mental health services have not been given that same priority. Why? I would think now more than ever before, mental health services are an essential part of this whole equation. How do you shut those down and you open liquor stores? I don't get that. To me, mental health services is paramount right now. We need them to help keep people sane. Now, I know a lot of the mental health people are working online, doing Zoom calls and Skype calls and that kind of thing. In fact, I still see my life coach via FaceTime or Zoom on the regular, meaning like every 3-4 weeks. And it's essential for me, and it's helped keep me kind of sane in the midst of all this. But they should be considered essential. As a result, people dealing with mental health crises have little choice but to wait in an overcrowded hospital emergency department to get the help they need, something that might discourage many of them from even making the effort. Well, not only that, but there's some people avoiding hospitals because they're very fearful that if I go to the hospital, I'm going to get COVID-19. I can tell you I had to go to the little clinic up here around the corner, on the little outpatient clinic, to take a look at my ankle that was swollen about a month and a half, 2 months ago, and it was ghost town. I was the only patient that showed up because I think people were just terrified to death of going into a medical facility. Oh, walk in there, you automatically get COVID-19, and I was not fearful of that, but that's making people stay away. Though suicide hotlines and telehealth services are still available, the wait time is much longer than usual because of the increase in the demand. This means that people contemplating suicide often have nowhere to turn, and then they do the deed. And this includes frontline healthcare workers who are at the forefront of dealing with the pandemic. I would think we need to, if it hasn't already been put into place, if you are a nurse, a doctor, a PA, whatever you are working on the front lines of helping patients with COVID-19, they should be getting free mental health care right now. Like, figure out a way to do it, because those people need it more than anybody. Yeah, some of us kind of dealing with the stress of all this and the worry of all this. Yeah, but you don't worry because you just had a patient die because the ventilator didn't work, and the trauma that comes from that. A lot of healthcare workers are talking about PTSD already from this. And I know several of them personally, and they're just ragged. You can see the bloodshot eyes. It's sad. And you try to be there for them, but they need some professional help. And I think if they want to help this crisis, that's one area where they could step up to provide these people with a regular mental health counselor that they could have on the ready to talk to when they need them. Other medical problems, this is another one. Along with these other issues, people with existing medical problems are also finding their access to health services are restricted because of the surge in coronavirus cases. This means the cancellation of an elective surgery, which a lot of them had to be canceled in like March, April into May, and now they're recently starting to let those come back. A much longer wait in the hospital emergency department and urgent care clinic, and having to deal with symptoms like chronic pain without getting any significant relief. Since many people with chronic medical problems are already vulnerable to suicide, losing access to medical services can reduce their ability to cope. I hate for this to be so grim, but I'm trying to present the reality of the situation as to how this unspoken truth about COVID-19 is starting to rear its ugly head. And we need to realize that all these things we're talking about is leading to a direct increase in suicide. And we can't ignore this. How about social and medial influences? Since the pandemic began, we've been regularly besieged with round-the-clock news coverage describing the impact of COVID-19, both nationally and internationally. Can I tell you, I have not turned on my television set one single time since mid-March. Nope. What's funny about this pandemic and the lockdown and everything, with sports being shut down, I realized the only reason I have a television is to watch live sports. That's it, because I haven't been tempted, haven't wanted to listen or watch TV, don't care. Because right now all they're doing is selling us a message of gloom and doom, and I'm a pretty happy-go-lucky guy. I don't do gloom and doom that well. And so that's having an impact on people because they're being constantly barraged with all these images and about the gloom and doom. Given the pessimism being conveyed by all these news stories, it's hardly surprising that many people are becoming increasingly depressed and angry at the same time as the prospect of the pandemic dragging on for many more months. At the same time, gun sales are also surging in many parts of the country. And that's true, way up. Has nothing to do with COVID-19. People are fearful. It might have a little bit to do with COVID-19 and the lockdowns and people thinking that's wrong and blah, blah, blah. But it also has to do with the social justice riots and things, and people are fearful from that because you see all kind of images. So there is an increase in the gun sales. And so now access to firearms now increases the risk of suicide as well. The number of firearm-related suicides are expected to be on the rise. So where do we go from here? What does the future look like? Research studies looking at the effects of trauma in previous disasters, including the 2003 SARS epidemic in Hong Kong, as well as the 2011 earthquake and nuclear disaster in Japan, have shown a significant rise in suicides both during the emergency itself, like right now for us, and in the months and years that followed. With the SARS epidemic in particular, most suicides involved the elderly or chronically ill who were afraid of becoming a burden to their family should they become infected, a concern that is already common among many of the COVID-19 patients. So did you think about that? When an elderly person becomes ill because they have COVID-19, rather than being a burden on their family, they kill themselves. It's a reality we need to face. Finding real solutions won't be easy, especially as COVID-19 drags on. Even with video conferencing and social media to help people avoid feeling isolated, enhanced suicide prevention services will still be needed, along with public education to ensure that people in crisis are aware of what resources are available to them, opportunities to help prevent suicide deaths that might otherwise occur. But research looking at past crises can also offer hope. Suicide rates actually went down following things like 9/11 due to a shared support through crisis. Despite the pessimism seen in recent weeks due to the pandemic worries and the racial riots, we can still work together to prevent unnecessary deaths and plan for the future. And that's what I'm hoping to do here today on Jimmy Rants is, let's put it on your radar screen. Maybe you weren't even thinking about this, and maybe you weren't even thinking about the ramifications that stress over this could lead to suicide, because you're pretty stable mentally yourself and you're resilient and you're able to withstand. And I think we need to be mindful of those people who aren't as resilient as you are, and those people who really need our help. Because quite frankly, we're all just that close from being pushed over the edge that we could be in that suicidal mindset as well. We don't ever want to think that way until you're there. And then once you're there, it's such a downward spiral so fast that it just happens and it's done and it's over. And there's no undoing that once it happens. All right, I've got this other article. I want to see if there's anything else in here that's different than what I just read from. So they're saying people in crisis may avoid hospitals, like we talked about, because of the fear of adding to the burden of already overwhelmed facilities or fear of catching the virus. The result is the perfect storm when it comes to a risk of suicide, according to Mark Rieger, the chief of psychology services at the VA in Seattle. And despite these concerns, COVID-19's impact on suicide, they're not real sure what's going to happen, but they suspect it's going to go up. And there's much that practicing psychologists can do to make sure people weather the storm without resorting to suicide, including screening patients, coming up with safety plans appropriate, and then advocating for improved mental health services. So it's all preventable, he says. We must use what we know can work to mitigate the risk in this time. And I think this is where each individual family, each individual friendship circle, you need to check on your people. And I have certain people in my life, some of which I know are susceptible to some of these possibilities of maybe going down the route of thinking about suicide. And so you check on those people voraciously. And quite frankly, ask other people to check in on you just to make sure. Like, you might think you're pretty strong, you might think you're pretty resilient, but then you have moments. I've had some moments in the midst of this. I will admit to you, I have had moments where I've been pretty darn down, pretty darn isolated, lonely, never to the point that I felt like I was at risk of wanting to kill myself. No, I have too much to live for. I love my life, but I do feel those feelings in that moment. And I could see how someone a little more vulnerable could feel those feelings, and it makes them so down that they feel like there's nowhere to go but kill themselves. And so check on your people. All right, so let me keep looking here. Sometimes during the periods of stress, people find strength in themselves that they didn't know they had. This is kind of a cool part of this as well, that yes, some people get pushed to suicide, but others go, wow, I'm pretty darn strong. Like, they didn't realize it until they were tested like this. I said in World War II, for example, they were anticipating all kinds of problems during the Blitz, but it turned out people, for the most part, did not have any additional mental health symptoms. So it's not unprecedented that you can avoid the temptation to commit suicide, and you actually see exactly the opposite, that you're stronger than you ever thought you were. So they give some tips on how clinicians, this is psychologists, psychiatrists, even medical professionals, can help. Learn more about suicide. Suicides are pretty rare, is what they say, but the result of that lack of familiarity, she says, can be anxiety among psychologists and mental health practitioners about whether they are prepared to assess the situation or not. The shift to what may be the unfamiliar medium of telehealth also exacerbates these worries. To boost their understanding of suicide, psychologists can review the suicide prevention literature and clinical resources. They should also make sure they are up to date on newer approaches to preventing and treating suicide. Specific interventions such as the safety planning intervention and the collaborative assessment and management of suicidality, as well as many general approaches like crisis response planning and dialectical behavior therapy. Psychologists might also want to identify any apps that can provide supplemental support to patients in between therapy sessions. Get them to focus on mindfulness, relaxation, and coping. And some of the ones include MY3 and Safety Plan and NowMattersNow.org. Which is an online repository of positive videos. It is best if someone searches and tests them out to see which of these works best for them. They also recommend you screen every patient. This is a time when we really need to be hyper vigilant about any kind of sign that there's suicidal thoughts and behaviors. Our most serious attention should be on those who have prior emotional and behavioral difficulties, but even people who may have never thought about suicide before could also be at a greater risk because of the level of stress we're all under. Like I said, I have felt feelings in 2020 that I've never had in my whole adult life. I usually roll with the punches pretty well, but I've had moments. Yes, I cried. I had moments. I'm not too ashamed to tell you I've had some moments in the midst of this, and you've all had those same moments at varying levels. One way to normalize such screening is for psychologists to ask patients at the beginning of every single session, how are you feeling physically? Then segue into checking in on their emotions. Providers also need to be on the lookout for another risk factor that has become more of an issue, discrimination. And if you're in that minority group, perhaps that's creating some stress that could be leading to suicide. So they're just putting that on the radar screen, screen that patient and see where their headspace is. Develop an action plan. If a psychologist suspects that a patient is experiencing suicidal thoughts, he or she should work with the patient to create a safety plan that includes a list of warning signs, coping strategies like engaging in movement or relaxation, contact information for the psychologist, other professionals, and friends that they can ask for help. Have them write down and print out sheets that they can put in places all over their house, very likely to see with the number of the call before they engage in any kind of self-injury. Be sure the plan is appropriate for use during the pandemic. Going to a gym or dining in a restaurant no longer appropriate coping strategies. Psychologists should also persuade patients to get guns, pills, and other potentially lethal objects out of the home. If they can do so while still practicing physical distancing, they should get permission to contact someone else in a patient's home if the patient doesn't show up for their session. So these are all good things. So they're also talking about following all the telehealth guidelines, which I know there's kind of the controversy right now of they should open it up so you can cross state lines with the telehealth, because right now, if you're a practicing physician, for example, here in my state of South Carolina, and you're only licensed in South Carolina, you can only provide telehealth to people in South Carolina. And so they need to release that. And I know that they're working on some of those kinds of things. Educate patients and their families and the public. Psychologists are very uniquely qualified to talk about during a pandemic that we all need to be each other's eyes and ears. And we need to reach out if someone is showing signs of suicide. Prioritize self-care. It's just as stressful for practitioners as it is for the patient. So spend time taking care of yourself so you can be of good use to your patient. Be an advocate. Help push for increased mental health services, especially to underserved populations who are disproportionately affected by the pandemic. Psychologists successfully advocated for the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services to allow audio-only telehealth for Medicare beneficiaries, a priority during the pandemic since they don't have smartphones or broadband for telehealth. Advocacy will have to continue even after the initial crisis passes. Flattening the curve on physical health is only the first half of the story. The second curve will be the national rise in mental health concerns that will soon follow. So they say, here is a suicide safety plan, and it should be all these elements. Warning signs or triggers of a developing crisis, coping strategies such as hobbies or relaxation, people to offer a distraction, people that you can ask for help, professionals or agencies to contact such as the Suicide Prevention Lifeline, steps for making the physical environment safer, and then things worth living for. So this is not a comfortable subject to talk about, but I think we need to be talking about these kinds of things because at some point the fear over the virus itself is going to subside. At some point COVID-19 will run its course. It's going to happen. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen with COVID-19. What's going to happen after COVID-19? What are we going to do with the ramifications of all of these things we talked about here today that's going to give people hopelessness, helplessness, feeling like there's nothing worth living for? And I'm very grateful in my life. I've had some moments in my life especially during the childhood trauma I experienced as a teenager where I had suicidal thoughts, that it just would be easier if I just killed myself and it was over. And so I know what that feels like. But at the same time, I don't have that anymore. I've been able to overcome it because of that stressful situation in my life. And so perhaps what will happen, maybe a positive out of this, is people go through this stress, and rather than letting it break them to the point they want to commit suicide, maybe they get stronger as a result of this. But they won't get stronger unless they have all those parameters in place to give them help in the midst of all of this. All right, I want to see what you guys have to say. I'm going to go over to Instagram first, then over to Facebook, finally over to YouTube. Thank you all for being here today on Jimmy Rants. JimmyRants.com is the website as always. Let's see what you guys have to say about this here topic. And Instagram's going to be a mute today. You didn't have anything to say? Really? Nothing? All right, well, I know I have some things over here on Facebook. What's up, Facebook? See if you guys have any comments for me. Norma says, we just had a huge death in my family. We are a hugging family, so this time is going to be very trying. Don't even know if there will be a funeral. He was a doctor in our town, so this is hitting me and our family very hard. Well, I'm sorry for your loss, Norma. And yeah, funerals have been very difficult. Like, I think about all those people who lost loved ones in the midst of this, not to COVID-19 necessarily, obviously all those people too, but people who just, lost people in the midst of this. You couldn't go to their funeral. And that's devastating, especially if it's like some close family member that was your chance to say goodbye. Hopefully they give people that can't have funerals an ability to maybe virtually, I don't know. I mean, there's got to be something that they do, because again, going back to those social connections, a funeral isn't a pleasant experience, but it is a social connection. I will never forget when my brother Kevin died, all the people that came out and the ceremony, and it was that letting go of him in our lives. And if you don't have that sort of closure, that starts to play a little bit in people's minds as well. So Norma, I do hope that you're able to get that closure that you need. Tracy says, plus the insurance companies are not giving money to businesses destroyed by the riots. Yeah, I don't know the legality of all that. I have a feeling there might be some lawsuits over that if they don't pay out. I guess if they didn't have riot insurance, I don't know. Like, how do you have insurance for stupidity? I don't know. Crystal says, we had 3 individual shoots last night in Washington. Shootings, is that what you mean? I think people are going crazy. Well, people are beyond crazy. I have seen behavior, even in my own work, you guys, of people say the stress-induced, nonsensical stuff, and it hasn't let up. I mean, you can say something very innocuous, and you're going to get somebody to fly off at you. If you have a big enough platform like I do, you're going to have those kind of comments. And I've dealt with them for years. I mean, people call me fat and they've called me whatever for many years. So I'm a little more resistant to that than most people because, all right, bruh, you can't say anything to me I haven't already heard a million times from all kinds of people on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. So, but you're right, people are definitely going crazy. Denny says, I think they had to keep the liquor store so you wouldn't have some people going through withdrawals. Well, what about someone who needs Jesus on Sunday morning and they're having withdrawals from Jesus? Why is Jesus not just as important a substance as alcohol? Like, I get what you're saying, Denny, but there could be an argument made for a lot of things that have been shuttered down. Kira says, and the virus is not a covered peril before that during lockdowns where a business could normally claim loss of income. Yeah, and that's where the government tried to help small businesses with some of the stimulus. I was eligible for some of that money because I haven't made any money this year except for my book royalties. That's literally the only income I've had pretty much the whole year. So I was eligible to get some loss of income stimulus. I refused it because I'm not taking money that could go to help someone else. I'm okay, and I'm okay to sacrifice that money to give it to someone else. how sad that we told so many people that they're not essential. That's like saying you're not important, and they went with no income, and many still don't have income. It's very sad. You know, that's a good point, Kira, that when you tell someone they're not essential, they hear, I'm worthless. And so if you hear you're worthless, and then you don't have any money because you lost that job because you're worthless, that could start to play some psychology as well, that could lead you down the path to maybe thinking suicide. Tracy said, I quit watching all the gloomy news years ago. Yeah, I don't watch news. I haven't watched traditional news in, I don't even know how long, over a decade, easily over a decade. I get most of my news just getting news stories that cross the wire. On my phone, I have a little alert that just gives me the top news stories. And on my iPhone, I can see what the top news stories are. And I sometimes will selectively look up things when I'm looking for ideas for Jimmy Rants. But for the most part, I'm not watching all the 24/7. If you watch CNN 24/7, gosh, I think anybody would want to kill themselves after doing that. And not just CNN, really any 24-hour constant news cycle of just making it all seem like the world's coming to an end. That does nobody any mental good. Melissa says, I'm surviving with God's help. I think we all are. That's all we can do. Nancy says, from my observation, we are seeing more violent crimes in my area, which is usually pretty low. Domestic violence seems to be on the uptake. Many group help organizations like AA have not been able to meet, and that's a shame. I think Alcoholics Anonymous does a great job. Yeah, you're right. I mean, there are things. Now, I'm very lucky. Here locally in Spartanburg, South Carolina, I have heard of no increase in crime. I'm sure, you know, some people have gone stir crazy and have gotten out and done nefarious things, but I have not heard it on a rampant scale like what you're hearing in some of the bigger cities where they're still looting and burning down buildings, and just the confrontations that I'm seeing in some of the videos online. I watched one this morning where it was in New York City, and it was this elderly couple on the subway, and this young African-American male just came up and started punching the man right in the face. No reason. He just started punching the crap out of him. And that poor man's wearing a mask, and he's trying his darndest to fend off the guy, but the guy just was punching the crap out of him. And I'm going, what possesses anybody to do something like that? God help us all. Thank you, Facebook. Let me pop over here to YouTube, see what you guys have to say. What's up, guys? Hello, Shirley and Debbie, or Deborah. We're being forced to introspect, not hear ourselves talk so much as we're accustomed to habitually doing. Oh, that's true. The introspection is real, that's for sure. We're sinking fast. It's not from the dreaded red button we Gen Xers and boomers feared back in the 80s and early 90s. Yeah, not even close. 3-month ownership and fledgling denote egotistical terms. We become too socially Darwinian for our own good in the US. The bugaboo has it out for all of us, like it or not. Edith, I always love your social commentary because you're pretty good. When people will return to work, Tootsie Roll Pop Center reference, answer the world will never know. How many licks does it take to get to the center of a Tootsie Pop? 1, 2, 3. See, I'm showing my age with that reference, and if you understood that, it means you're a certain age. So. And it was an owl too. You got to remember that too. All right, let's pop over here to Instagram, see if there's any final comments. Oh, I got a few comments. Fasted Human says, this is all so hard to watch happening. Yeah, the thing is, we know, like, we can see this coming a mile away. So how do you prevent it? Like, this is the healthcare crisis, much more so after COVID-19 is over. This is going to be the healthcare crisis. It's not a physical healthcare crisis. It's a mental health crisis. And I've already talked to several of my friends that are in the mental health space, psychologists, psychiatrists, and they are all worried. Like, they feel like they're going to get overrun, that they don't have enough manpower to be able to handle all the patients. And so what's going to happen? they've got to prioritize who's at most risk right now. And so if people are really on the verge of suicide, you got to help those people right now and quick and pronto and have things in place. The thing is, how do you get those people to get into the system before they kill themselves? Because if they don't get help, they don't seek professional help, or access to that help is denied because of financial things. I know in Australia, I read a news story today that they think suicide is going to surpass COVID-19 deaths. They think suicide deaths is going to surpass COVID-19 deaths just because of all the stuff that they put into place because of COVID-19 to protect health. It's going to lead to more death. And you kind of go, why? Like, why did we get to that point? Joshua says some families don't ever fully gather until funerals. That's true. That's very true, because sometimes I've been to funerals and I go, oh, I forgot I had that uncle or whatever. So you're right. Unfortunately, that is the case. All right, guys. Well, let me end this Jimmy Rants just by reminding you that this is real. COVID-19 has an unspoken truth that none of us are talking about. Yes, we need to be concerned about the virus. Yes, we need to be doing all the things that we hear talked about in order to protect us from that. But let's not forget the unintended consequences of a lot of these parameters that have been put into place to protect us from the virus have now created a new health crisis, mental health crisis, which I've talked about in previous Jimmy Rants, but it's leading to suicide. I can't wait to see all the epidemiologists that take a look at what this experiment of the past few months has done to us as a society. Like, directly speaking, forget COVID-19 and all the things associated with it. That's obvious. What are all the unintended consequences that happened as a direct result of all the mandates, all the rules, all the regulations, all the covering of your face, all of the stay away from people, all the canceling of major life events? Like, I think about all those high school kids that just graduated and they didn't get to walk. All those kids that were going to have a prom in the spring and it was canceled. Like, these are like major life events, and what ramifications does that have? Oh my gosh, I always wanted to ask that girl out to the prom, and that was going to be my chance to make her my girlfriend who could someday be my wife. Like, think about those kind of things. And those people are now ruminating on all these lost opportunities. That's playing a role in this as well. And these researchers are going to look at all this data, because the data is still coming in. People are going to kill themselves today because of the stress of all this. And we need to be mindful of that. We need to remind ourselves and not stick our head in the ground and say, well, I'm doing okay. So I'm doing okay, everybody's doing okay. You might be doing okay, and that's great. Good job. I'm glad you're doing great. But you've got to be mindful of those people who aren't doing great. That's it for this episode of Jimmy Rants. JimmyRants.com is the website. And as always, you can engage live in the content. But you got to go follow me right here on Instagram. I'm at Living Low Carb Man, LIVINLOWCARBMAN. Once you're there, engage live. We're here Monday through Friday, 11 a.m. Eastern Time. So check it out. We also simulcast live over on my Facebook page. So thank you guys for watching here today. We also simulcast over on my YouTube channel. So thank you all for being here today on Jimmy Rants. If you missed the live here on Instagram, we do have it on IGTV for you to watch on replay. We also put the replay over on YouTube. Type in the keyword Jimmy Rants. You will find the show. This is Tuesday, so we have a best of Jimmy Rants audio that plays. And so today, go over to llvlc.com or wherever you listen to podcasts, and you can listen to today's show over there. And then finally, go over to jimmyrants.com. It's the official website for this show. And we really appreciate it. You can watch the videos there anytime you want. But we would really appreciate it if you like what we do here. Click on the Patreon link. Any donation of any amount would be greatly appreciated. All right, guys, that's it for now. We'll be back again real soon. Bye. All right. What's up, Elena Wang? I see you just popped in. Yeah, so interesting subjects and interesting things going on out there. Like, we need to be mindful of all these things. Because the moment we forget about things like people killing themselves over the stress, I think we lose a part of our humanity. And of course, they're not going to report on these kinds of things until much later. Right now, it's too juicy to talk about deaths from COVID-19. It's too juicy to talk about all the race relations stuff and the Washington Redskins having to change their name and all those kinds of things. I think we're kind of caught up right now in information overload, that some things are starting to get slipped by and slip through the cracks that nobody's noticing. And then not to mention all the things they're not reporting on, because again, all this other stuff, CNN, Fox News, all of them know, let's talk about COVID, let's talk about deaths, let's talk about increase in rates of cases, let's talk about the race relations stuff, let's talk about all the cultural things, but let's only talk about that because that's getting eyeballs. And so it misses all these stories like, gee, I wonder what's going to happen to suicide rates. It's one of the reasons I wanted to do this Jimmy Rants today, because nobody, literally nobody's talking about this. So, all right, let me pop off of here for now, you guys. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll be back again soon. Bye. Johanna says, my 9-year-old son said he wants to kill that person who invented COVID-19. Well, he's not the only one. There are definitely people that are frustrated as you know what, because it does suck what we're all going through right now. So, all right, thank you, YouTube. We'll see you later. Bye.